Hi, can you hear me? We're going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. On behalf of the Thriving Youth Task Force, we're really glad you came out here tonight to hear Dr. Rob Teresi to speak to us about how we as parents can play an important role in the prevention of alcohol use in our teens. My name is Shelley Skoglund, and this is Sergeant James Palmieri, and we're the co-chairs of the Thriving Youth Task Force. The task force brings together leadership from the town, the schools, the police department, parent organizations, and other organizations that serve youth to identify the issues that are affecting the youth in the town and to work out solutions to promote and empower positive youth development. We do a lot of our work based on the results of a survey that we do of all of our 7th to 12th grade students every 3 years. And we have found some really interesting things that are a little troubling. The most recent survey in 2017 did show some positive movements in reduction in the rates of past 30-day use of alcohol in our teens. But what we were really alarmed by was that more than half of our seniors report frequent binge drinking. And that's more than twice the national average. We know that as parents, it's really difficult to navigate this time in our kids' lives and to provide them with guidance and information to make good choices. And it's our hope that tonight, Dr. Teresi will give you the tools that you need to make the right decision about underage drinking for your family. Before we formally introduce Dr. Teresi, we'd like to thank the Community Fund of Darien, the Depot, Parent Awareness, and the library for graciously putting this event on tonight.
So I'm going to introduce the star of the show. Dr. Teresi is currently a professor at Penn State University with a joint appointment in the Department of Biobehavioral Health and Prevention Research Center. Dr. Teresi's work focuses on developing and evaluating parent and individual level prevention efforts to reduce alcohol abuse and alcohol-related consequences for adolescents, college students, and emerging adults. His prevention research has been supported by grants from the National Institutes of Health, National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the National Cancer Institute for over 30 years. Dr. Teresi is also the author of a parent handbook for talking with students, which you can all get at the door. Hopefully you already did. The parent handbook is still the only evidence-based parent-based intervention that has undergone the rigor of 10 well-controlled clinical trials. The research in the parent handbook has been vetted and reviewed in the Surgeon General's report as one of the 2 prevention approaches that meet the rigorous criteria to be considered efficacious for preventing student drinking and consequences. That's impressive. The data continues to show that the parent handbook not only prevents student drinking, but also reduces drinking of those students with established high-risk drinking habits. Thank you to the task force, program planners, and additional handbook sponsors. Each of you in attendance, again, will be given a copy or already took a copy of the parent handbook. Additional copies will be available at Town Hall, and you can also reach out to Shelley and I if you know somebody that would like to get their hands on one. And thank you again, Dr. Teresi, for coming.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you that I'm wearing a jacket. I'm very professional. Now I'm going to take it off. In fact, I had it off up until like 5 minutes ago. Look, I'm going to start by sharing a few thoughts, and I will share more thoughts and talk more and more and more and more, and then I'll let you ask me anything you want. All right, does that sound fair? All right, wonderful. Let me start first off by sharing with you that a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight are going to be studies, and I'll differentiate the difference between studies we've done and my opinion by saying this is what I think versus this is what the data show and this is what the studies show, just so that you can make the distinction between, you know, my beliefs, which are a hell of a lot like yours, and what we now know from the evidence, which is not related to my beliefs at all. In fact, a lot of the evidence will be sometimes counterintuitive. And if there's anything that I've learned in decades of doing this is that what I think is going on rarely is actually what's going on. And it's not that I'm naive, it's just that science is messy. And it doesn't always work the way we want it to. And I guarantee I'd like it to work the way I want it to. It would make my life a lot easier if it was that way, just like it would make your lives a lot easier if everything was smooth and silky too, but that's just not how this works. And so when I started talking with Marley and other people about the title of my talk, they they want it to be kind of catchy so that everybody come. And I really appreciate the number of people that came. If I had to name it, it would be something boring like the evidence shows or examination of, or something really dull that a professor would think up and say, that's really cool. And that would be my thinking. But I want you to notice here, it says, what seems to work. Okay, so I'm going to share with you what the data show. I'm going to share with you sometimes what I think, which wouldn't necessarily be what the data show. And I want to point out that I'm trying to hedge my bets. I believe it will work. I really would. And I'm not a gambler, but if I was going to gamble on anything, I'd gamble on the evidence because it's going to be right more often than not in a lot of ways. And in fact, as scientists, for those of you who are not scientists in the room, we really can't say something significant unless it happens 95 times out of 100. So that means if we were to run this study 100 times and it worked 95 times, then we could say, yeah, that's good. If I'm going to go to Atlantic City, I'm going to go with much different odds than having to be successful 95 times out of 100. In fact, if I were to bet on football games, which I don't, because I can conceive of any possible thing happening, if I could win 51% of the time, I'd actually be doing pretty good. So what it comes down to is that I'm going to share the science with you. I want to tell you, I want to start a little bit about who I am, but I'll kind of merge into this. I'd like to say that at any point in time you can ask me a question, but I'm fearful that we won't have enough time to cover things. So if you feel you really need to ask me a question, go ahead and ask me. And if not being a true New Yorker, I'll say to you, can I hold off on that and ask you an answer? I promise I'll answer it. But I don't want you to be sitting there thinking about the question and then missing something I have to share. So if you really feel like you want to ask me, go right ahead. Also, I want to qualify right at the beginning some things that are really important. I noticed that James introduced me. He talked about that the work's been funded by the National Institute of Health and different agencies of the federal government. So here's how that works. I submit a proposal to them. It's an idea that I want to test something. So for example, one of the ideas might be, I'm really interested if we give parents this information, will they use it and will they talk to their sons and daughters? And a committee of 10 or 20 people will basically tell me how every single thing I've ever done in my life is wrong and horrible and how I should never get funded. But if I really want to do this work, here are all the things I have to change. And I'll have to then go in and revise and resubmit. I usually get 2 or 3 times to do that before I get funded. I can tell you right now, if you put 40 academic people in a room, there'll be 40 different ways to solve a problem. No one will agree with anyone. And so all the work that I'm going to talk about today will be making it through that gauntlet of people that are harshly critical of the work that we've done. And pretty much the same thing for publishing in medical journals. I had once a colleague say to me, well, they're all your friends, Rob, so of course you can publish this stuff. And I said, oh, I wish it was that easy. I can't even get people that I work with every day to agree with me on stuff like that. So I just want to point out that when this comes to you at this level, it's been harshly vetted. And I stay up nights thinking about how can we get this stuff done. All right, so let's start by me learning how to use this computer. Okay, so how's that? Okay, great. All right, so I want to start by just pointing out that when I started my career, I was mostly working with younger people. So high schoolers and middle schoolers. And the numbers that were presented to you about binge drinking were pretty common. I mean, in fact, we haven't noticed a real big change in decades in the number of younger people that are drinking at a very risky level. Alcohol is the most commonly abused drug. It's the largest demographic for alcohol abuse is between the ages of 18 and 25. The second largest one is the ages of 15 to 17. So I just want to start by saying that's what the studies have consistently shown. We learn a lot by the Monitoring the Future study. It's done out of University of Michigan. It's a large national longitudinal study, and pretty much they're the gold standard by us looking and saying, okay, what's going on now? So if we think about all the alcohol that is consumed in the United States, the largest amount is being consumed by individuals 18 and 25. I'll just stop right there. The second largest 15 to 17-year-olds. So all you people that are drinking wine and martinis and all that kind of stuff, you pale by comparison to the amount that you consume relative to the younger populations that live with us, okay? Why is that important? I'll tell you in a little bit, okay? But that's what we're looking at when we think about young people. So as I started my career, like I mentioned, I was working with middle schoolers and adolescents at the time. I really actually started working in an alcohol detox facility where the police, like James, would bring people to me that had gotten in trouble at different places around the city, in their homes and so on. And they would come to me and they'd say, Rob, we're supposed to drop him off for you, so see you later. And then that's literally what they would do. And then my job was to do an assessment of the individual. Usually it was between the age of 18 and 65. Most of the people are between the age of 35 and 55. My job was to do an assessment of them to identify whether I had to bring them to the hospital or keep them and intake them. Most of the people we intaked, but some of the people I had to transport to the hospital for medical detoxes because of a variety of different reasons. But the people that we kept, for the next 48 hours, we would try and identify different treatment plan options as they would become more and more sober. And I did that for most of my career, and I thought, early in my career, and I thought, I'd like to prevent these things from happening. And one thing I noticed about the younger people that came in, they would like get in an argument with their girlfriend, or they get in an argument with somebody in their family, and they would go on this drinking binge without really any regard for, 2 weeks from now. So they would have a problem, and they'd quit their job, they'd break up with their home. Their dealing with the problem was really different than an older person that way. And so I kind of felt like my passion was starting to move towards trying to help younger people. And I think that that's a pretty common thing for all of you, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to make a difference in younger people's lives. So I don't think my view on that was unique in any way, shape, or form, but that's what I really wanted to do. And so as I was thinking about working with younger people, I was thinking about doing things with schools, because I looked at school-based interventions and I felt like we could do something a little different. Now, just before I go any further, when I say interventions, what I think of when I say interventions, I'm thinking of, by the way, I have this mic on and I'm not even using it. All right, when I think of interventions, I think of things that are brief, short, but maximally effective. So I want it to be the least amount of time, I want to reach the largest number of people, but I want it to be maximally effective. And most interventions that take place at school are not short. They're usually things that take hours and hours, weeks and weeks, and a lot of time and a lot of intensity. Okay. The other thing that I noticed about school-based interventions is it required a lot of people. You had to have coaches, you have to people train, you have to people implement things, you have to have parents show up. It's really challenging for parents to show up. And one thing I learned really early on in my career, parents don't have a lot of time in their lives for psychologists. In fact, I've never woke up one day, even being a psychologist, thinking, gosh, I really wish I would be hanging out with a psychologist today. More hours, the better. I just don't think like that, and I don't think many people do. And so ultimately, I think brief, something that's short, something that's maximally effective, all right? So I thought, I'll work with schools. And early on in that process, I realized I can't work with schools, and here was the reason why. Because the approach that I took was to give people choices among alternatives, and then to see which alternative they thought would be best for them. And I really believe in this idea that individuals know more often than not what's best for them. They don't want me to be telling them what's best for them. And more often than not, for those of you who are in kind of a counseling profession or some kind of treatment profession, you've heard the idea of meeting people where they are. And I learned really early on, there's no point in me telling people, to be successful, you have to get to this point. What I really believe in is this idea of ask them what's most important to them, what's most concerning to them, what are things that they think will make a difference, and then work with them on things they think they'll be most successful at. And by doing that, usually you have more success than by putting standards on people that are just unachievable. And I felt like schools at the time, because we all know that a high percentage of our sons and daughters, our youth, are already drinking, to tell them that they can't is sometimes off-putting. To talk to their families and say, to not let your kids drink could be very off-putting, because they say, well, I already do, or I already drink, now what? Now what do I do? Okay? You told me I can't. All the prevention programs are telling me I shouldn't, and we already do. And so I thought, give them alternatives. And the thing that I thought was the most important alternative was at that time, keeping our young people off the streets out of cars. Don't ride with somebody, don't drive with somebody. And I wanted them to know what to do if they had been drinking and needed to get someplace safely that didn't involve them driving in a car. And I couldn't do that through schools, because schools were like, look, they're not supposed to be drinking, and so we can't teach them what to do afterwards because that's kind of condoning drinking. And so I went, maybe I can't work with schools. So I decided I would work with parents. Now, the 25-year-old version of me was a lot more idealistic and a lot more naive. I'm still pretty naive, I have to admit to that. But then I was really naive, and my thought was, I'll work, instead of working with 35 or 45 or 50-year-old people that are coming into the clinic that I'm working with, that most of them have diagnostic alcohol disorders, I'll work with, easy to change people, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and their parents. Very easy to change by comparison. And so my thinking was, these are the people that I'll be successful changing. And I shared a story earlier that I thought in my mid-20s that I would do this for about 2 decades, about 20 years. In my mid-40s, after I've already succeeded at my goal, I would take on another career profession. In fact, I even asked my wife, who was my fiance at the time, is it okay if I do something else after I'm in my mid-40s and, the problems are much lower? And she said, sure. Okay. At the time, she was saying sure because she knew I was naive and I'd probably be doing this longer. But I thought she was just saying, yeah, go ahead, be a fly fishing guide. Do whatever you want when you're in your 40s and you've solved this problem. Needless to say, I was a little depressed in my mid-40s when I had not yet solved the problem. And here I am now turning 60, and I feel like we're just beginning to think about how to solve the problem. So that being the case, the work that I did with young people that was parent-based and community-based, I published in all the top-tier medical journals in that area. And then in that process, I started branching out to doing cancer research and cancer prevention as well, and I moved into those things. And then I decided what I really, really want to do, now that I've done work and developed materials for younger people, I want to adapt these for older individuals, older teens, individuals that are in their senior years, junior, senior years of high school, that are transitioning to the next phase of their life post-high school. And when I decided I want to do this, it was really a function of me being a professor, and I would sit in my office and I'd have a student come to meet with me. And this happened over and over and over again. And what would happen would be, there'd be a student, and the student would be graduating or near graduation from college. The student would be doing really well in all classes, and I would sit down and say, what do you think about what next phase for you? Thinking about like law school, medical school, psychology, graduate school, what's your thinking? And the student would go, well, I don't think I can get in. I was like, what are you talking about? You got like all A's. You're a great student. You're on every committee. You're doing volunteer work. You presented already at a conference. What do you mean you don't think you're going to get in? And then they would share a story. And the story would always be about what happened when they first showed up at a college campus in those first few weeks, going to some party that changed the course of their lives, at least for a couple of years. And they're usually really bad stories. One story in particular was horrific, and it really made me think I need to try and make a difference. And it was this young woman who early in her college career had gone to a party, drank too much, blacked out, didn't realize where she was, didn't realize who she was with, and I think you can see where this story's going. And she had to drop out of school, she had to have counseling, she finally came back, was doing really well, and all I saw was the really well version of her. And then I realized, maybe we should do this. So I started asking my students, your parents know how much you really drink? And they go, no. What, are you kidding me? And I said, and I did this all the time. Then I'd give talks in high schools, and instead of sitting in a room with parents, I'd be sitting in a room with students, and I go, do your parents really know how much you drink? And they'd look and they giggle and they laugh and they go, no. All right, so I started asking the question that would follow that. And that's what I do. I ask a lot of questions. The second question was, if your parents knew, do you think they would do things differently? And they said yes, both at the seniors in high school and the college level. I said, oh, interesting. Do you think you would drink differently if they did things that were different? And that was kind of an important question to ask, because if they said, no, I'd probably do the same thing, it might have changed what I did with my career. But they said something that I thought gave me some hope. They said, yeah, I think I would. I think I definitely would. So I started asking students this routinely. It was like, hey, my name's Rob Teresi. I'm teaching this class. I got a couple of questions I want to ask you. First question is, do your parents know what you drink? Raise your hands. No hands would go up. I'd say, okay, raise your hands if your parents talk to you about this. Do you think it would change what you would do? And hands would go up. So I realized right away that young people felt differently than their parents felt, because I'd ask their parents the same thing. Do you think that your kids drink, and do you think that they would change what they do if you knew and you communicated with them? More parents thought their kids didn't drink yet, or if they did, they didn't have any concerns or problems, and they thought that their sons and daughters wouldn't necessarily change their behavior if they talked to them. That's what parents thought. So I realized right away I had a little bit of an uphill. Students were saying, yeah, I think it would be very helpful, and parents were saying, I don't think it would help. So I realized right away that my side of the work had to be with the parents. So as I started talking to my colleagues about this idea, because usually I try and bounce ideas off my colleagues because they might represent a little bit about the NIH boards, this is what they told me. That won't work. Oh, ready? That might be the worst idea I've ever heard. Really encouraging stuff, by the way. And you have a nice career going. You sure you want to do this? And with that kind of support and moral building, I, being a little stubborn, thought, I still kind of feel like this is important, because I keep having students show up in my office, and I'm sure other colleagues have the same experiences, where students' lives are really being derailed. Now I want to start by talking, before I go into this, the Monitoring the Future study that I talked about before. We just finished doing some work with parents who will let their kids drink alcohol in small doses, and I'll share a little bit if I have time about that at the end. But the Monitoring the Future study shows that drinking goes up as teens increase their age. So at 13, 14, and 15 in the United States, they see that the drinking gradually going up. And then when they hit their junior and senior years in high school, it goes up again. And then if they go to college, it goes up skyrocketing. So everybody, the light drinkers, the non-drinkers go up to be light drinkers, the light drinkers go up to be weekend heavy drinkers, the weekend heavy drinkers become heavy drinkers, and the really heavy drinkers, well, they stay the same. They're really heavy drinkers. But everybody goes up. And we looked at that pattern of everybody going up between their senior year in high school and their first year of college, and we learned something else that was a little disturbing to me, even knowing what I know. Whatever that high water mark that they reach in the first few months at college, that's where they stay throughout the entirety of college. And then there was some work that came out saying that students mature out of that pattern when they leave college, okay? And that was the initial view. As they take on adult roles and they get jobs and they get more serious in their relationships and so on and so forth, they mature out of that pattern. More recently, we're finding out that students that go up and hit that high point in the high water mark, they don't mature out. So we know that early on now, that jump from 15 to 17, and then that next really big jump from 17 to 18, if it goes up really high, they stay at that level on into their 30s. Okay, that's the Monitoring the Future data. We finished 2 large-scale studies at Penn State. One took place and involved 2,000 drinkers at Penn State in their first year of college, and we interviewed them every semester throughout college for 4 years, so we had 8 semesters worth of data on 2,000 plus student drinkers. And then what we did is we looked at 18 weekends that we randomly picked from their college experience. And we looked at those 18 weekends where we did diary data on them. And we only looked at 700 of the 2,000-something students, and these were students who told us that they combined alcohol with at least one other drug, whether it be marijuana or speed or something else. And so we had a subsample of that. There was about 750 students who had what we call combiners. They combine alcohol with other drugs when they go out at night. So you can see right away, we started with 2,000-something, and 1/3 of those had admitted that they actually combine alcohol with other drugs. And we found that the students that combine alcohol with other drugs, they don't mature out. We found that it mirrored the Monitoring the Future data, and we learned a lot from that. The other longitudinal study, we followed students and their parents. And we did that also for 4 years. And that took place at Penn State, the University of Washington out west, and Florida International in the southeast. And we did that deliberately because we wanted to have geographic diversity in our sample to see if things were common across different parts of our country. We also did it because no one else had ever done that large of a study on both sons and daughters and their parents. And we learned a lot from those two studies relative to the Monitoring the Future data. But what was common across the Monitoring the Future data and our two large longitudinal well-controlled studies was that idea about students accelerating and hitting that high water mark. And we realized that what we really need to do is we really need to disrupt that acceleration. Because if we could disrupt that acceleration, then we could disrupt that sort of stable, high-risk behavior. This is a little different than what should we do, what should we not do. So I forgot, my title is What Seems to Work, What Doesn't. It changes our goal when we think about this, when you think, let's do things that disrupt this pattern, then let's do everything perfect, all right? Because I don't think any of us here are capable of doing everything perfect. But what we are capable of doing is disrupting things. And what we can do is do things that are little that might disrupt these patterns. And that's something that I really believe in, is this idea of disruption. You see something that's not working, try and mess with it. And that's exactly what sunscreen does in a lot of ways. Sunscreen doesn't really keep us from getting bombed by UV radiation. What it does is when it hits us, it just disrupts it so the concentration is not as strong and not as unhealthy for us. And so I borrowed from my cancer work to think about what do we need to do here. So if you take from what I'm going to share with you small pieces that you could use to disrupt these patterns, you're already being successful by doing that. And it doesn't require a big overhaul change in your life. It requires you to just consider, among the different things I could possibly do, what seems to be best for me. And when you look at these materials, I have a folder here. When you look at this empty folder here, no. When you look at these materials, think that way. Don't think I have to do everything in here perfectly or I'm not going to be successful. Think, what are some nuggets, if you will, from here that I can do that would help disrupt what we know to be the case. So a lot of times, and if I do this and I offend anyone, I don't intend to. Instead of asking parents, do you think this will happen? I say, when this happens, what are the things you'd like to see your kids not experience? All right? So I don't assume it's not going to happen. I assume it's going to happen. And that reason is, for 85% of our kids, it happens. So if you're the 15%, far out. That's great. I don't think you are. Not everybody. Somebody's got to be part of that 85%. So this is what's going on, all right? Couple other disclosures. First disclosure, my battery's running low. What do I do? I hit close, but there's got to be some other solution here. Do I have this is my laptop. Okay, all right, that's okay. If we don't have really cool pictures, I will act it out. Okay. All right, so fast forward 25 years. I could, but then I'd have to load this on, and much easier just to get a cord. But thank you, just in case that happens. Although, I think you probably want to see me act some of these things out, right? My interpretive dance of fast forward 25 years. Anyway, so let me go back to this. All right, so from that, everybody's saying this is a horrible idea. Fast forward 25 years, Google, I love Google, all right? I know that Google is a very intrusive thing in our lives, but I really still love Google. Anybody here work for Google? Okay, well, I could say anything I want about Google. All right, so 187 million hits on college student drinking. It's a lot of hits. 299 million hits on college student drinking prevention. Hey, we're winning, okay? And that's up from 35 million just a few years ago, which means there's a lot more effort that's going on to preventing things, which I think is a positive thing. And then 106 million hits on parent-based college drinking interventions, which is up from 5 million just a few years ago, and 0 when I started this work, okay? Yeah, when I started this work, there wasn't anybody else doing it. Remember the comments? No one was saying, hey, this is a good idea. You should join other people. They were like, you're crazy. All right, so nuggets. All right, so I operate from a prevention framework. Just to think about this real quick, I won't spend a lot of time on it. And there's like 4 phases of this prevention framework. The epidemiology and etiology, that's just trying to figure out what's going on. What are the factors that matter? What makes a difference? In a lot of ways, it's doing an assessment to try and better understand what it is we should intervene on and what we should use in our interventions. So there was an epidemiology phase of collecting all the information that would go into this and having to answer and do studies that might benefit it where there were gaps. The second was this idea of looking at a proof of concept, which is, will it work? Or should we just stop, or should we go back to the drawing board? So the idea was to just try and test it. And you'll see that there's citations underneath the different phases because we have to do it this way. It has to be very systematic. Otherwise, it will not be accepted from the medical and professional journals. And then after that, the idea is to test its efficacy in those clinical trials. And there's different versions of the materials. I have created these materials. These materials are much more harm reduction in their focus. So the idea is that they should be for individuals who already maybe have started drinking versus ones that haven't, and different ideas for everybody. It's supposed to be universally delivered that way. And then I've developed materials for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which you'll see, Power of Parents. How many people here have seen something from the Mothers Drunk Driving ones? Okay. They're really good. When they first came out, they were much less harm reduction. They were much more say no to everything. And I, that's the value system and the philosophy of that organization. I work with them, so I believe in it, but I also don't want to leave anybody behind. So I recognize there are going to be differences that way. And so I was testing both groups. And then the idea is then dissemination. And I know that we're disseminating here, and there'll be somebody that will talk a little bit more about making them available to people. But right now we're in every state in the United States. We're in multiple countries in Europe, and we're in Australia. And the reason we're in all these places is because of the evidence base, not because we're nice or popular or anything like that. We have our detractors too. And with all of these, they're kind of a fluid working model. So anybody that we work with, we say, this is going to change as the science changes. And you have to also be prepared to disseminate a better version of this as we learn more from it. So it's not this is going to work forever. This is working now. This is what the science shows. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what's in here and why. Okay, a little bit that way. The first one is high-risk drinking in youth, all right? Alcohol is ubiquitous. It's everywhere that we are. You can't go anywhere and not be exposed to alcohol in some manner, shape, or form. Where I live, right next to our campus, if we walk the street, which is College Avenue, and my campus is not different than any other campus on the country. It's just a size, it's a scale thing. So for smaller campuses, it's the same thing, but just fewer. And for larger campuses, which there aren't many larger campuses than at Penn State, there's just more. So it's just a matter of scale for students. We have 45,000 students on our campus. We have, on the weekends, We have visitors from their students, so it's entirely possible that this weekend, it's an away game, so we could have upwards of 90,000 to 150,000 students as everybody has a friend or two come visit kind of thing. So that's a typical, I know I'm looking at some people here and they're going, holy, they're being very polite and they're not saying what I'm thinking, but the idea is the same, like, oh my God, how do you do this, Rob? Well, I'll tell you. Anyway, so we could have 150 students living, and by the way, our street, our campus is not that much different than Darien. So when I drove up and down Post Road before I got here, I tried to get a size of scale here. This Post Road from, if you go underneath and come back, from there to there, that's bigger than walking that same distance in State College, all right? So there are 45 different places that you can get a beer on that street. 2 blocks away from that, there's another 60 fraternity houses, so that's 60 more places that you can get a beer. Then there's house parties that are not related to fraternities. There's a lot of those too. So on those 2 streets, 3 streets that really run parallel to the campus, there's literally hundreds of places you can get a beer, or jungle juice, or something else, okay? Now, you might say, well, Rob, there's 150,000 students there in a weekend and close to 450,000 on game day weekends. So is that a lot? Well, let's put it in comparison. There's 2 places you can get an apple. One of them's a McDonald's, so you have to get a little bag of apples with your Happy Meal, and the other one's a grocery store. Apples everywhere. Okay. Small college, I went to Rhode Island College, not far from here, okay? And Rhode Island College, Chalkstone Avenue, we don't have 100+ places to get a beer, but we had, a good dozen, give or take another dozen. And we had 3,000 students. So it's just a matter of scale. Every university, every college town, every place in the United States that works with me, they always start the conversation off by, I think we have a drinking problem. And I think, I'm at Penn State. You're talking about a drinking problem? Let me tell you what a drinking problem is. I've seen people wear shirts, and I forgot, I have to think about what the name of the shirt. It's kind of like, I'm a football fan that has, it's basically a football problem, but it's a drinking something. Does anybody know what that is? Can you tell me? I'm always looking at it after I've had a couple of drinks. No, I'm only kidding. Okay, second is peers and availability. So why don't young people drink? First off, it's everywhere. The second is peer influences. Peer influences are subtle, like, hey, we're going out, you want to come? Peer influences are subtle, like what your young sons and daughters think is happening that may not mirror what's actually happening. How many people here have had people say, everybody is drinking, there's nothing better to do? They've heard that at least once. Come on, raise your hand if you've heard that. You've heard that? Okay. It may be true. I haven't hung out in Darien long enough. But the reality is that's what everybody says. And we've done studies to test whether that's true or not. So we've looked at whether there's coffee shops, whether there's music, whether there's other forms of entertainment, you name it, athletic things, just on and on and on and on. And we ask students, how do you feel about going to them? And then how do you feel like going to them if you pregame and have a couple of drinks beforehand? No matter what the event is, they always like going with a couple of drinks beforehand. Better than they like without it. Alternatives, okay? So peers, and the most common way to change drinking is to change misperceptions that exist. I do individual interventions with students when they come to my office on occasion, just because that's what I do. I don't impose it on them. They're coming there just for that reason. And I ask students, how many drinks do you drink on a weekend when you go out on a night? And they tell me how much they drink. More often than not, they drink more than 5 or 6 drinks when they go out. And when they drink more than 5 or 6 drinks, they're actually drinking more than 83% of the students that are on campus that time. They don't know that. And when I share that with them, and I just pause and I don't say anything after that, they go, because they're thinking, I didn't know that I drank more than 80-something% of the students on campus. Because when I'm out, I see other people drinking more than me. And I say, well, that's probably because you hang out with the 17% that are drinking more than 80% of the students on campus. They go, yeah, I think you're right. And it makes them rethink whether that's what they really want to do. You don't have to do an intervention. You could just share that data. All right, the next one is elevated opportunities. I already talked about how easy it is to get a beer and how difficult it is to get an apple. That's common. The next one is, why do youth drink? They're willing to experience what we call consequences. So we call things like blacking out, we call things like passing out, we call things like vomiting, we call things like maybe getting in a fight, getting in an argument. Well, you can go down a list. There's common measures to measure consequences for students. The only ones they see as consequences are ones that affect their academics, or if they disappoint their parents, oddly enough. So if you think blacking out, passing out, vomiting on yourself, urinating on yourself, having your jacket stolen, losing your iPhone, I can keep going down, are negative, they're not. In fact, oftentimes, they're part of the fabric of the funny stories about how good that party was. So if that's the mechanism you're trying to get people to change by talking about these consequences, odds are it won't be effective. They're not motivating, unless it's related to academics or disappointment of parents. Once again, parents show up in that process. Why do students drink? Reduce social controls. Parents oftentimes are part of the problem, in large part because they want to be able to drink with their kids. I'll get more into this because I don't want to just throw this out there, but oftentimes we see that when parents engage in drinking activities with their sons and daughters, those kids tend to drink more often, more frequently, heavier, in combination with other drugs, and experience more consequences. And again, I'll talk more about that. By the way, you see the woman in the pink dress doing keg stand? She's a mom, yep. You see the guy that's got the camera around him? He's got a little cup in his hand. It turns out that the campus that kid was going to school at instilled a 1 drink per person policy for the homecoming event. And so the fraternity, in their infinite wisdom, decided to have very large cups. Okay? And the dad decided he would partake with the sons and daughters with those large cups. Those are huge Dixie cups, don't you think? All right. The mother who's doing a keg stand there, I have a colleague of mine who looks at that and says, she's not looking at the mother. She's going, I can't believe she's doing that wearing pink pumps. Okay. So why do students drink? They drink because it's available, highly available. They drink because of peer influences. They drink because of reduced social controls. And they are willing to experience the consequence. It makes it a little tough and challenging then to alter behaviors. I'm going to get a little brainy on you. I am in the Department of Biobehavioral Health and brain development, self-regulatory behavior. This is kind of an important thing for us to understand. We've learned over the past 10, 15 years through the advancements of technology that young people's brains are not fully developed until they're in their early to mid-20s. I'll just stop right there for a second because that's a really important point. Their brains are not fully developed until their early to mid-20s. The area of the brain that's the last to develop is the front part right here, the biggest part of our brain. It's the frontal cortex, and that's where all the rational behavior is. That's where we think logically, we make decisions, we think about the future. It's where we really control what separates us from everything else on the planet. It's where we have memory. It's the ability for us to think about the future. Who here is dog lover? Who loves dogs? A lot of you. Can I see hands? I'm going to insult you all. Sorry about that. I don't mean to. I'm a dog lover too. But I'm going to tell you something about dogs. When we leave our houses, they never know where we went or whether we're coming back. because they don't have a brain like we do. We can think in terms of the fact that other people go to places that we can visualize and think about. Our dogs just think we're on the other side of the door. Till we show up again, they're like, whoa, my God, you're back. I can't believe it. I have no idea where you went, but I know you left that door on that other side, and I was here this whole time. And then you leave, and it's the same thing again. They're like, oh, you left the door. And what do? They walk around a little bit because they're looking for you, and then eventually they take a nap. But I know when you leave that door, you're probably going to work. I hope you're getting me a cup of coffee and thinking about stuff like this, because I know this. And I will text you and say, on your way back, can you get me a cup of coffee? Because I know you're near Starbucks. Anyway, so the bottom line is that's what separates us from everybody else. The part of the brain that develops the earliest is the part that has an impact on our emotions. So the red line that's here in this picture, that red line kind of separating the emotional part from the thinking part. So how we feel from how we think, right? The part that's how we feel, we're really good at that when we're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, I'll just keep going. We're really good at that. In fact, anybody here is a teenager in your house, there is no shortage of feelings. Feelings galore. Feelings, way too much feelings thrown on there. Not a lot of rational thinking, though. More feelings than rational thinking, and as they get older, the difference between those two areas is better. So here's your future. For those of you who have older kids, you already know what I'm talking about. It gets a little better. For you who have younger kids, you got a lot to look forward to, but you're living in the now. I can't help you with that. But it's important as far as drinking goes, because I remember giving this talk in North Carolina, and there's a guy named Larry Steinberg, and Larry's neuropsychologist, and he basically doesn't really believe we should be doing a lot of interventions with younger kids because their brains are not developed enough for them to really sustain the behavior change. And I was giving this talk, and at the time, my talk was at the end, because at the beginning part, it was all the neuroscientists talking about the brain and all the pieces of the brain and what we're doing with the brain, and I was at the end trying to give people hope that they can change their behavior despite the fact that they're not fully developed yet. But Larry was killing the people that went before me, because he was saying, the brain's not really developed, that's not going to work, it's not going to help, motion, and And I realized I was coming up next. I was coming up later in the day. And he was going to say the same things to me. So I was sitting there thinking about, what am I going to say to him? And I was having a little panic attack because I wasn't coming up with a good answer. And I watched him really, literally shred colleagues before me talking about the brain's not developed, why bother? And then it came to me. And what came to me was, when you walk around with young people, you will see glimpses where they'll say, please, thank you, hold the door open, ask you how you're feeling, do all these really cool, mature things. And then when with their friends, you go, we should, that emotional stuff. And then they'll come back and they'll be like, please, thank you, I'll call you when I get there, I'll text you, you can text me, I'll text you back, I'll do it. Maturity, right? And it made me realize that on college campuses, Monday through Thursday, really Sunday through Thursday, we see a lot of that really well-controlled adult behavior. Friday and Saturday night, not so much. Sunday, they're back. So it's not necessarily a matter of all or none in the development. It's a matter of that it's there, but depending upon what environment they're in, if they're in an environment that brings out the rational side, they'll be more rational. If they're in an environment that brings out the emotional side, they'll be more emotional. The environment really, it interacts with who they are. So when you sit down with your son and daughters in the right, calm, quiet place, and you talk about drinking, and you talk about what they're going to do, and you talk about in these calm, rational tones, they may in turn be rational with you. When they're with their friends and you're not around, you're hoping that it generalizes to where they are at that moment. But it's going to be really hard. And I'll talk a little bit what you can do to make that happen. All right. Now, this is showing two kids, two parents, one's talking. The side with the yellow shows rational thinking behavior. The side with the blue shows that this kid's just not mature enough to be able to take on that message. And kids are going to be different. So we have to recognize that. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to talk about how do you talk to them. And the way you want to talk to them is in here. There are tidbits in here that talk about this. But if you don't remember everything in here, remember to walk away with one thing. If you ask your kids questions that start with how, what, and why, it does several things. If you say, do you know, then they could say yes or no, and the conversation's over. If you say, what do you think about? How would that work? Why do you think that would happen? You're doing a few things. You're getting them to talk a little bit more. You're getting them to problem solve better. And you're getting their brain to develop between those centers so that when they're in these other situations, they're less likely to just accept yes or no's from other people, and they're more likely to do the how, what, and why with their friends. So oftentimes what I do is I try and help parents think about getting their kids to come up with what is plan B if plan A doesn't work. How will you respond if this occurs? Why would you do that and not that? And those kind of questions really go a long way to A, conveying the information in a more effective way, and also helping their brains develop. All right? Any questions on that? Okay, cool. All right, so that being the case, this is a picture that shows the two different worlds that young people live in. One side, which is rational during the day, adult norms, and the other side where it's not as rational. And what I want to do is I want to show you some evidence of the materials that I'm talking about today that gives us a better sense of how to make it this other way. I'm going to skip through some of these things just because I've been sharing some of these stories all along. So I talked about drinking and non-drinking alternatives. I talked about reactions to parents' involvement and how parents have an influence. And I mentioned the clinical trials. And some of these clinical trials are multiple sites. They're with incoming students transitioning between high school and college. Some are higher risk populations, so they're athletes. Student athletes tend to be a higher risk population than non-athletes, which is really counterintuitive. So on campuses, the highest and heaviest drinking risk group are usually individuals that are associated with fraternities and sororities. The second highest risk drinking group are students that were high school athletes and or college athletes now. And again, if you think about it, it's kind of counterintuitive because oftentimes we get our kids involved in sports to give them something else to do, keep them off the streets, be around adult role models, something that's healthy activities for them. And then somewhere along the way, it changes from being an extremely healthy thing to a high-risk thing. And part of the reason why it's a high-risk thing is because athletic groups have the strongest peer normative influences of any of the groups that exist. It's really hard to do this. There's another tidbit that I'll help you. People talk about the influence of peers and how peers are difficult, and that's absolutely true. One of the recommendations we make to parents based on the science is that they encourage their sons and daughters to have multiple and diverse sets of friends, different peer groups. So if your child's an athlete, get them to do something that doesn't involve hanging out with the athletes every once in a while. If your child's not an athlete, get them to hang out with the athletes every once in a while. Get them to read a book they wouldn't normally read. Get them to see a movie they wouldn't normally see. Get them to do things with other friends. That's something that you actually have some control over as a parent. And the younger your kids are, the more control you have over that. But it's really important because what happens is as kids get older, they tend to spend times with fewer diverse peer groups. And if that happens and their only peers are drinkers, it's hard to say no and still have friends and a social life. So how, what, and why questions, and then try and encourage multiple and diverse peer groups. It's a protective factor. Again, it gives your child an opportunity to maybe switch and spend time with different friends that don't share the same values that maybe your son or daughter wants to have. So we've looked at a lot of different groups, and our idea is to try and test these to find out where they don't work. And our idea is to test these to see if they disrupt the trends. Now, I know I'm running short on time, and you all have worked probably really hard, so I'm just going to ask for another 5, maybe 10 minutes tops, and then I'll stop. I'll also stick around for questions if you want. This booklet is a brief intervention. Its target audience is typical families. So for some of you who read a lot, you might read it and have this impression of, well, it reads kind of a little bit differently. It's meant for everybody. So some people are going to be prolific readers, some people are not, and we need it to be able to speak to a range of people. The book is set up to motivate parents, provide knowledge so that when they have conversations, they're more knowledgeable about the conversations, and provide them with skills to help improve communications. The reason why is because if parents are motivated but they don't know what to do or they don't know how to talk about it, they're not going to be as effective. On the other hand, if they're not motivated and they have all this knowledge and all these skills but they're not motivated, they're not going to do anything with it, and so on. So in other words, all three of these pieces need to exist. Now, there might be some parents that are not motivated and they're not going to do anything. Our goal is really to try and help them become motivated. So I usually ask parents, if you don't think it's for you, read a few pages, skim it, see what you think. If there's nothing in there for you, put it away. There might be at some point. But at least take a peek at some of it to see if there's something that resonates with you. And then look for the knowledge, because some parents tell me, I really want to talk to my sons and daughters, but I'm not really sure what I should cover, what I should do. Well, again, these materials help provide the knowledge base based on the evidence. All of this knowledge exists in the medical journals and the behavioral science journals that we publish in, but it's highly unlikely that many parents are going to go read that, so that's why we put this together for you. And then skills. I kind of feel like there's probably at least some skills that you might do everything really well, but there's some things that might help you. Look for the 1 or 2 things that could potentially help you that disrupt things. And it's got a strong evidence base. It's registered with the Clinical Trials Registry, which means that it's been vetted by the Clinical Trials Registry people to show that it's been tested under these rigorous designs. So it's really quite neat. And it's actually not that long. And if you use it as a guide and you just flip through it, there'll be things that you'll see. The feedback that we hear from most parents is universally pretty positive. Every once in a while I get people that say, Rob, this is kind of boring, but it did help me a little bit. And then I say, is there anything I could do to fix it? So I'm going to say to you, you're going to get a chance to be part of the development of this material. If you read it and you see places where it can change things, it could be better, I'm really easy to find. You can Google me or you can email me at rteresi@psu.edu. You can share any opinion you have. I'm willing to listen, and I really take everybody's views very seriously. In the subject line, if you do email me, write Darian, and that way it'll cue me to read your email and respond back. I'm usually really good about responding. Typically my response time is less than a day. Unless I'm traveling someplace, then it could be 2 days, but usually I'll get back to you. If I can't give you a really good response, I'll at least say, I got your email, I'll get back in touch with you shortly. So I'm going to go an overview of the research about, does it work? Why does it work? What's going on? And some of this will be hopefully very enlightening. So you didn't realize you were going to be tested on this later, but this is going to happen. I'm a professor. I do things like that. No, I'm not really going to test you. All right, so what I want to show you here was that this is from one of our studies that was published in Psychology of Addictive Behaviors. And the red bars are the families whose parents receive the materials and then use those materials to guide conversations with their sons and daughters. The gray bars are parents that did not get access to those materials. So what you're going to see is a trend where the red bars are always lower. The numbers represent the number of drinks on a Saturday night, or over the weekend, I should say. Sorry about that. So it's Friday and Saturday night. So the red bar, you can see it's 5.08. That's the average across the thousands of kids that were in the study whose parents read the materials. So there's still drinking going on at this age, but it's always under 3 drinks a night, which is considered to be kind of a safe number as far as consequences go. And then in the gray bars, they're approaching 9s and 10s. I don't have them broken down for you by sex, but we did do this. Males always drink more than females. That's just a given. And the numbers are a little bit lower for females in terms of what's considered a high-risk behavior. So parents had these conversations between the senior year of high school and then the beginning of that, trying to be disruptive in that word. And in essence, the materials were able to disrupt that pattern and reduce the amount of drinking that went on in these different groups. It reduced the heaviest drinking behavior the same way. You'll always see the red bars are going to be lower than the gray bars. Something interesting about this, too, is that these were simple, quick conversations that occurred in that summer. And yet the findings showed that they sustained that change that happened well into the spring 9 months later, even under the highest risk environment things. Missing school, not going to classes, driving impaired, smoking marijuana. And so, and there's more. This is just a glimpse to show you that the red bars are generally lower. So it's disrupting the behavior. Does it work for different families? And of course, different families are going to have different success rates. But let's just take a real quick peek, and then I'll kind of wrap up. So this also represents one of the graphs, and I want to just kind of break this down for you. On the bottom, you see where it says BA, AVG, AA. Those are the communication skills tested of the parents before the study began. So there were parents that were kind of below average in the ability to communicate skill-wise. There were parents that were typical parents, everyday parents who were average in their communication. And there were parents that were above average, really, really strong, really high-level communicators. All right? And then on the left side, number of drinks is the number of drinks that the teenager consumed on a Saturday night, okay? And that is post-intervention. The red line, as you can see, that's the individuals whose parents got the materials and talked to their kids. And so I want to point something out. You see the 1.8 there? So when parents who are really good communicators to start get these materials and they use them to guide their kids drink on average less than 2 drinks when they go out on Saturday night when they're away at college in this high-risk environment. The average communicators drink about 2.5 drinks. And the worst communicators, their kids drink 3 drinks. So as you can see, the better the parents are at communicating at the beginning, the more effective it is, right? But at no time does the red line ever go above the yellow. And the yellow represents parents that are good communicators, typical parents, and weaker communicators that didn't get the materials. And so this yellow line represents the worst case scenario for parents to get the materials and talk to their kids. And I want to point out one other thing before I jump away from this graph. Let's look at the below average parents who were not quite as good at communicating when it started. The kids drank about 3 drinks when they went out. That's less than the best communicating parents who didn't get the materials. So what that tells me, and I'll bring it home to you. For all the people you know in Darien who are really good parents, who are really good communicators, but don't use these materials, that's a snapshot of what your kids are likely to do. For all the parents in Darien who are actually maybe not so good at communicating, but they take a copy of the materials and look for nuggets, that's a snapshot of what would occur. Under no circumstance are the best communicating parents going to do better than the worst communicating parents who get access to the materials. That effect put us in the Surgeon General's report. And it worked the same way when we looked at monitoring. It looked the same way when we looked at the rules that parents put in their home for whether their kids can drink. So the same pattern showed. So if I put this in perspective, if you let your kids have access to alcohol and you're an outstanding communicator, your kids are going to likely drink more than the worst communicating parents that don't let their kids drink alcohol. That's the same effect. And again, that's what put us in the Surgeon General's report as being one of the 2 most efficacious programs. In other words, when you can come up with something simple like this, give it to any parent, and that parent outperform the parents that don't use this by that wide a margin every single time, it says it works. All right, I want to jump ahead real quickly and talk about profiles, and then I'm going to stop. Not everybody drinks the same way, not even teenagers. And what we've learned, some teens will drink a little bit, and others will drink everything on one night. Obviously, the ones that drink everything on one night reach blood alcohol levels that are much more dangerous, much more likely to have consequences. So there's different profiles. And what you see on the left side are the different ways to assess drinking. And then if you go across, you see different profiles. So this first one that's green, it's hard to see on the screen. These are kids who really don't drink in the past month, don't get drunk in the past month, don't binge drink. They never let their BACs get above 0.8. In other words, these are the light, non-drinking kids. The next group of kids that are out there are kids that drink on weekends, but they don't binge. And that's what the yellows kind of show, that they do have blowout nights, but they really don't binge on over. The next group are the kids that basically drink on weekends too, but they drink heavy when they drink on weekends. And the last group, they drink heavy at all times when they drink. So there's 4 different kinds of groups with kids, right, that are out there. They represent the kind of kids that live in all of our communities. If I had to pick one kid, I'd say I'd want the kid that's a lighter drinker versus the heavier drinker, right? So we looked at the effects of the intervention on these kids. We looked at what works and what doesn't, or what seems to work and what doesn't. So is the booklet effective at changing it? What we found was that the booklet was able to move the heavy, high-risk drinking kids out of that profile when the parents used it as a method. So even though those kids are already started to drink, and those kids were already drinking very heavily, when the parents used the materials in the book to help their kids, those kids transitioned out to being either weekend drinkers. Sometimes they transitioned a little bit to weekend bingers, but that's better than heavy every single time. The weekend bingers moved out of the weekend binge profile into light weekend drinkers. And so what it did was, remember that everything goes up? This had the effect of moving the heaviest ones back down, even though they already established that behavior. So instead of leaving those parents behind and leaving those kids behind and saying, oh, once you start, there's not much we can do, there's a lot that you can do. So when you think, I can't, you can. I think I've run out of time, and I think I've actually done, I've asked a lot of you, 15 more minutes. I'm happy to share one more tidbit if you really want me to stay. But if you don't, I'll also just say thank you very much. Do you want me to do one more thing? All right. This one's kind of important. All right, so we've learned that there's a group that we call the MRC group. MRC group stands for multiple and repeated consequences. So some kids, when they drink, they experience different things. So one night it might be an argument, another night might be getting sick, another night it might be the next day they're hungover. So there are different things that happen at different times. Then there's a group of kids that experience multiple consequences repeatedly. They're the highest risk group. They're the group, they make up 20-something% of the kids, but they account for over 50% of the problems. And we've done this at multiple places. So if I had to guess, and I'd say I do the work here at Darien, what I would say is there's 20% of the kids that live in Darien that make up half of all the problems in Darien. So that seems to be a very good group to target to try and reduce problems. So I looked at different parenting profiles to say which parenting profiles most associated with that happening and which parenting profiles least associated with that happening. And I measured monitoring, positive communication, negative communication, where the parents approved of their kids drinking a little bit of controlled situations or monitored situations, and their parents' own drinking. And I did that for mothers and fathers, and I found 4 different groups. I found one group of parents that did everything right and they let their kids drink. So they communicated really well. They monitored their kids really well when they went out. They modeled really well, didn't show a lot of drunkenness around their kids. But they said it was okay for those kids to drink holidays, sometimes graduation parties, things like that, if there's parents around that could supervise. And those parents did this when I asked them why. They always gave me positive reasons, healthy reasons. They were trying to take the mystery away from their kids. They were trying to expose them to little doses to help them understand what alcohol did to them. In other words, they were trying to be protective parents. They were really trying to help their kids. It wasn't one of these scenarios that said, oh, I don't care, I drank when I was a kid, they should drink too. It was that they were genuinely trying to help their kids. So we called them the positive pro-alcohol parents. Then we found another group that we called positive anti-alcohol. So they communicated the same way as the positive pro-alcohol. Really good communicators. Monitored the same way. Really good monitors. Modeled drinking the same way. Really good models. But they said, they pumped the brakes. They said, no, not on holidays, not on weekends, not at your friend's house when their parents are around supervising. You're too young. That's it. Science shows your brain's developing. Too young. So we have these two groups, and they're exactly the same in terms of everything they do. One lets them drink, the other one doesn't. So this is something that is kind of important because it really speaks to the majority of parents that are out there. These two groups. They really fall into one of these two groups. The third group we found were what we called negative mother, and this is where the problems with the mother was really the source of the problem in the home in terms of modeling, monitoring, communicating. And then the negative father. And again, if you look at and negative fathers with the father's the problem. If you look at negative mother and negative father, they represent 19 and 8% respectively, or 27% of the parents. So the other group represents 70% of the parents, those two, right? So you probably want to know what the data show, right? In terms of what parents raise MRC kids. And now I have to go. Well, this is what we learned. We learned that the positive pro-alcohol parents were almost 4 times more likely to have kids that were in the MRC group. We learned that the negative mother was only 1.84 times, 2 times more likely. So, in other words, being a really good communicator and modeling and monitoring and everything good and letting your kids have access to limited amounts of alcohol for very positive, healthy reasons, you're 2 times more likely to have a kid that makes up the 20% that accounts for 50% of the problems than an alcoholic mother who doesn't monitor, doesn't communicate, and doesn't model very well. Negative father was almost 6 times more likely to have that happen. But not very much different than the positive pro-alcohol one. I made these comparisons relative to the positive parent that was negative about alcohol. So somebody asked me, they said, Rob, somebody asked me that was in my family, actually it was my 28-year-old son, asked me at one point in time, Dad, do you think we'll have a beer together before I'm 21? And if I didn't do this work, I said, actually, to be honest with you, if I didn't do this work, probably. You seem smart enough, you seem mature enough, you seem like a regular kid, and I can't see the harm of letting you have a beer. But I know what the data show. I don't know that I'd be a really good dad if I did that, knowing what I know. However, I'm practical. I want you to think about this. If you can come up with some really strong, compelling reasons why you think I should, and how it might make us closer, knowing what we know, I'll buy the first round. But I want you to take about a week or 2 to think about it. That was really hard for me because I knew what the data showed. And it would have been easy just to give him a beer. He's a real smart kid and did everything right, pretty much. And he came back a week or so later, and I said, what do you think? He goes, no, I'm good. Now, I'll tell you, he did drink when he was in college. He's a kid, college kid. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I thought my wife would have more difficulty doing that. But when I looked at the data, I knew that it wouldn't, and by the way, we replicated these data in a few different studies, so it wasn't one of these things where it was a one-shot deal. All right, so in terms of the best profile, honestly, the data show this positive anti-alcohol. Despite that, we have not shown any benefits of a protective factor for doing it. And we tried. By the way, a lot of the science is me wanting to know how I should raise my kids. Well, they're already older, so I've already kind of done that. I did a study on tailgates and what kids see at tailgates and how it affects their behavior. And I went, oh crap, can't drink at tailgates anymore. And stuff like that, it just did it. Anyway, so the summary of what I think works is parents make a difference by influencing the change of these self-regulatory behaviors through their parenting. They help their kids be protective by doing this. And it really does make a difference. So I'm not, I'll leave this up here. I didn't do this all by myself. I will say at the end here, I'd be lying to you if I told you I thought it was going to work this way when we started doing the work. I didn't anticipate it. That's why I said the science tells you what's going to do it. With that, I kept you a long time. I really apologize. Don't send me hate emails. Thank you.